Hey, lovies, I'm back. All right, so we're on day two, or this is video two, not day two, it's video two. So we're talking about service connection today. And what we'll look at is the meaning of service connection and how to prove service connection for your VA disability claim. All right, so the last video I talked to you about who can file a claim and what are the qualifications to file a VA disability claim. Number one, you must be a veteran. Number two, you must have a discharge that is other than dishonorable, I'm sorry. And number three, you must have evidence of a current disability, and that disability must be linked to your military service. And that's the key, linked to military service. So not just that you have a disability, you have to link that disability to military service via a nexus, which is an as likely as not statement from a medical provider. So you would have your DD 214 and military records to prove your active duty service. You would have your DD 214 to also prove your discharge status being anything other than dishonorable. And again, for those who do have dishonorable discharges, if your discharge for is related to mental illness, you can seek out counseling from VA. Sometimes, depending on the circumstances surrounding the discharge, those can be changed. So just because you have a dishonorable discharge doesn't mean that you are just out as far as disability benefits are concerned. Reach out to a VBA case manager or VBA case manager, and talk to them about having your discharge changed or upgraded. Yes, and then of course, making sure that there is evidence of a disability in your military medical records. And then once you have those things, then you can file for benefits, and you will most likely be scheduled for a CMP exam where a medical provider will need to link your disability to medical service, meaning they will state whether or not that disability was more likely than not caused by military service. All right, so that's the key. It has to be linked to service, and depending on the type of disability, it has to be linked via nexus. It's what they call a nexus. The VA calls a nexus, where the provider states that they feel that that disability is related to your military service. Okay, all right, so enough of that. Now let's look at service connections. There are several ways to get your disability service connected. The most usual route is direct service connection. And what that is like I said, normally you will have your military medical records, and they will state that you either had an injury during service, or you were sick during service, or developed an illness or disease during service, and that would serve as your evidence of disability during service. Okay, so that's the most usual way, is direct service connection. Sometimes you don't have military records, so it doesn't always mean that you have to have those records in order to get direct service connection, because you can also use lay statements, where you write a statement documenting what happened during service. And if you have any battle buddies that you're still in contact with, or anyone who served with you, they can also write a lay statement, which is called a buddy statement, to attest to whatever it is that you stated happened to you. And those carry a lot of weight, more weight than most people know. So that's important as well. So if you don't have records, that doesn't mean you still cannot get benefits, but it just means that you'll have to go about it a different route. Okay, so that's direct service connection. And then other avenues of service connection I did state that you can use lay statements and buddy statements, and I always encourage you to use those in addition to your records anyways, regardless of if you have your medical records or not. Always use a lay statement. Either you write a statement yourself detailing what happened, um, how it's um, how it's attributed to whatever current disability you have, and the chronicity, because you have to show that this is something that happened in service, has continued, and is currently an issue, um, in order for it to be service connected, because chronicity is a part of that. It's a factor that they look at. If you say, there's something happened in service, but you don't have any disability, or it's not affecting you in any way currently, then if they do link it to your service and you get service connected for it, if you have no chronicity or no current disability currently, then it will be connected at 0%. All right, so that's that. I lost my train of thought because I was about to say something else. But anyways, yeah. All right. So, service connection. That's where we are. You want to request your medical records. That's where I was going. Reach out to the National Archives. Request a copy of your medical records. You can also reach out to the VA and make that request. You can do so on va.gov once you create an account, and you can log in to start to create a file for your disability claim. There is a section there where you can request copies of medical records as well. So you can do that. I encourage you to do both. Do it within the va.gov site, and do it through and request your records through the National Archives as well. The National Archives tends to take a little bit longer. I never got mine from the National Archives. It seemed like it was easier to request them through the VA. So try both avenues. Okay, so we talked direct service connection. Now I'm going to talk about other avenues of service connection, and the other ways. There are a few. One is secondary service connection. So secondary service connection is when you have a direct service connected disability, and that disability causes something else. Okay. So let's say I have diabetes. Diabetes is known to cause heart trouble and kidney disease. So let's say I had diabetes, chronic diabetes, over a long period of time, and eventually it started to impact my kidneys. If I'm service connected for diabetes and I develop kidney disease to a rate that's disabling, I can file a secondary service connection claim for kidney disease due to diabetes. And if the VA feels that or if your medical exam, whomever conducts your medical exam, your CMP exam, feels that kidney disease is directly correlated to your already service-connected diabetes by nexus, meaning that they state it's as likely as not connected, then you will also be compensated for kidney disease, okay? And there's a lot of situations where you have one illness and it causes other things to happen, and VA is just recognizing that if not for said condition, then these conditions would not occur. And so they give you the benefit of the doubt and will service connect those disabilities as well. So think about that when you're filing your claims. If you have something that's going on as a result of those injuries or illnesses that incurred in service, you want to file those secondary conditions as well at that time. All right. The next type of service connection is aggravation. So this one is a little bit similar to secondary, except that aggravation is where you have a condition that is already in place. So you may enter the military with a condition, already. And that condition is aggravated by your military service. And so, in that case, whatever level of aggravation the VA determines that your military service has with your original condition, they will pay you that difference in disability. A good example. Let's say you go into service and you have anemia. It's not okay. Let's say you have anemia, and it's mild and it's manageable with iron, for instance. All right. So over time, your anemia becomes more chronic and it's more difficult to manage. As a result of that, you develop sorry, I lost my train of thought. You develop hemolytic anemia, which is anemia of the autoimmune system. So maybe you had anemia initially, wasn't that bad. So, but over time it becomes worse, and then you discover that it is actually, I want to say it's hemolytic anemia that is autoimmune, and so you you file for disability, and the VA says, well, you filed for direct service connected. The VA will say, well, you already had anemia. And so you can go back and say, well, yes, I had anemia, but now I have hemolytic anemia, which is autoimmune. So because of military service, my normal anemia has now developed into a hemolytic anemia. So then they can rate you based on the difference, if that makes sense, the difference in aggravation. All right, probably was a horrible example, but I think you guys know what I mean. And then there's also another type of service connection, which is presumptive. Now, presumptives are good. And I say good because it's less of a burden on the veteran to prove that the said disability is related to service. So the VA knows that there are certain conditions that are more prone to veterans. And then they know that there are certain conditions more prone to veterans who served in certain arenas. All right. So for instance, if we look at Vietnam, Korea, Thailand, there are several places where the VA has conceded that Agent Orange was utilized and affected veterans immensely. And for those places, they have determined presumptive service connection. So what that does is it takes out the requirement for the veteran to obtain the nexus or the link to military service that's normally required. Because remember, first you have to prove that you have to prove the status of a veteran, and you have to prove that you're honorably discharged or not dishonorably discharged. You have to prove that there is a disability, a current disability, and you have to connect that disability to service. So you have to provide the nexus. And the presumptive service connections remove the requirement for the veteran to prove the nexus. So the VA looks at certain service connections for conditions related to Agent Orange exposure as presumptives. So what those are people who served in certain areas, like I said before, for instance, um, Vietnam, Korea, Thailand, and I have on my distance glasses. And then these conditions are conditions that are known effects of Agent Orange exposure. And just for instance, Hodgkin's disease, type 2 diabetes, multiple myeloma, any B cell leukemia, prostate cancer, Parkinson's. Oh, there is a list. So um, if you served in those areas, please, please, please go look at the list of presumptives that are there, because if you have any of those diseases, then you really need to make sure that you file for those. There are also service connections for Agent Orange exposure outside of Vietnam. And one of those, like I was saying, was Korea, the DMZ. Um, Service in the Navy or Coast Guard aboard certain ships, um, certain Air Force bases also stored Agent Orange, or some of the carriers moved Agent Orange and different toxic agents. There's Thailand again. So there are several places outside of Vietnam where exposure is conceded as well. Another area of consideration is PACT Act. After the PACT Act, it kind of broadened the ability for veterans to uh, file claims for exposures, and it removed the requirement that veterans needed to prove that burn pits cause illnesses. So the PACT Act is huge, especially for Gulf War veterans who served in Korea. No, I'm sorry, not Korea. In the Gulf War veterans um, who were exposed to burn pits and other chemical toxins in Afghanistan and Iraq. So if you served in those areas, you were exposed to burn pits, have certain disability or certain illnesses, then you want to look at that presumptive list as well, because it's pretty exhaustive also, especially if you have issues with asthma, sinusitis, those types of things. A lot of those are related to burn pits. Um, yes, and it says here that the PACT Act added 20 presumptive conditions for burn pits, Agent Orange, and other toxic substances. So that's worth noting. And then there's also the toxic exposure, um, the Toxic Exposure Act, Toxic Exposure Something Act, the TARA. That also gave additional presumptives for other toxic exposures. So there are a lot of presumptives out there now for a lot of illnesses that have developed due to serving in certain areas and having certain exposures, especially with Agent Orange. That's a huge one. And I know that there's a lot there are quite a few bases here that are domestic that also house toxic chemicals. And while they may not be on the presumptive list, you can still file claims for those. You just have to have evidence to support exposure in those cases. So it might be a little bit harder with those, but it's still possible. And then the presumptives, it's an exhaustive list as well. There are lots of cancers listed there. There are lots of respiratory issues listed there. Um, yeah, so take a look at the presumptive if you served in any of the areas such as Afghanistan, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi, the UAE. They're all listed there. So check those out as well. All right, so that's it. This is a long one. Sorry, guys. So service connection. This is all about service connection. So again, if this helps you, please like and subscribe. If you know someone who is trying to obtain information on how to file their veteran claim, please share this with them. And hopefully you'll come back for the next video. And that will be on, let me see what we'll talk about next. We talked about presumptives. We'll talk about CMP exams. All right. Thank you guys for watching and have a wonderful day. Love y'all.